Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. They got us a nice, huge room, so you guys all spread out, comfortable. Listen, I've got to tell you, we decided to make a last-minute change because originally we were planning on, burying with about 100, 150 PowerPoint slides, right? You guys haven't had enough of that already? So we've decided to switch this up a bit because at this point, this is actually probably the greatest idea or the worst we've had. Please let us know in the feedback. But the idea is we thought, you know what, there's been, I'm sure, enough death by PowerPoint. We would actually like to take a moment to turn it into, I jokingly make the comment, I'm going to Phil Donahue it. Now, you'd have to be old enough, I heard only one laugh, to actually know what that means. But what it does mean is I want to turn this into more of a conversation. Don't be scared. I'm going to be wandering around picking on you, asking some questions, kind of forcing the conversation, because this is actually a very, very interesting topic. And let me explain how this kind of started. So my name is Kelman Mayhew. I'm a security architect. Some of you might know me. I've been around doing the SecTor thing for a while, spoke at a few things. I've done some talking. Has anyone here seen me before? Run into any of my talks? As you'll know, I'm a little bit opinionated. My wife calls it pig-headed, same kind of thing. But it's okay to have opinions. It's when we disagree is when we actually learn something. And so hopefully we have some conversations more than just us talking about slides. Zach, would you like to give us an introduction?
Yeah, Zachary Schmidt here from New Jersey. Glad to be back in Toronto. It's been about 5 years since I've been back. I essentially leveraged a lot of my mathematical background into the enterprise space over my career over the last 15 years. And I have the absolute pleasure of being joined on stage by Chris Story. Though a lot of my background's been with very large enterprise and the complexities that correlate around those, when we're talking about what we're looking to do and ultimately the mission at hand, it's very important that we focus on not just the biggest of the big, but the smallest of small. I had my perspective on the large enterprise. Chris had the perspective on the SMB, and it's been an awesome dynamic. So just to kind of set the stage for the conversation that we're having today on stage is essentially to focus, my responses and essentially what I'm talking about, giving a perspective on the big enterprise and the larger types of companies, and then Chris having that on the SMB. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, guys, I'm Christopher Story. Been around the block a time or two. Maybe I'm older than I look. Maybe I'm younger than I look. I don't know. Hopefully I'm, younger than I look? Older than
that's
I
what
look?
you want,
I'm not sure. But as Zach mentioned, my entire career has been focused on the SMB space, and it may come as no surprise to you, where Americans sue us. But in the United States, the SMB market is neglected in a very similar way to Canada. So we'll talk a little bit about why small business is so important to national security. We'll get into all these topics, but thank you all for coming. As Kelman mentioned, this is reliant on interactivity. So if we don't get interaction, we're gonna call people out. It's gonna get uncomfortable. So please, 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 if you have questions, do not hesitate. Kelman will
I can take care of that part. I always make people uncomfortable. So I should let you guys know where this talk came from. So Zach, I've known for many years. He joined an entry-level sales program. Don't let the sales moniker trick you. For a vendor I work for. But he was rather unique in that he approached his sales very methodically, very processed. I found out later he has a degree in physics. He's actually very math-driven, and he loved analytics. And what I found really impressive about the work he did, because we had the sales engineer relationship, I could take care of the technical, but he turned the sales aspect into technical, where he would run circles around our own pricing people just to get the customer the best opportunity and the best bet. So shortly after, the whole pandemic, we've all been stuck at home. He reaches out to me and goes, "Hey, I found this cool new tool, and I'd love for you to check it out and get your opinion." Now, I'm going to confess up front, I thought, oh, wow, yes, another ROI from a vendor, except this wasn't really from a vendor. I say, I don't trust this ROI calculators from vendors because, surprise, your ROI will all come from buying everything from that vendor. And that kind of, I've seen 100, right? We've all seen 100 of these. You had the vendor come in and tell you, look at our if you buy our stuff, it's like you save so much money. How could you not do it? But that's when Zach goes, "Kelman, you're missing the bigger picture. What we're actually trying to do is look at the overall risk of the country, of not just the businesses, because the part we're forgetting is it's not individual companies. It's a lot of companies put together that make the whole of our national security. If you want to jump up and let's define for you for a moment what the Court of National Security is. It's the collective responsibility. And so what he took from me was not just the risk involved in a specific company, but the ongoing risk, the outgoing risk to every other company, and then fundamentally down to the people. And it was a much more interesting discussion. Zach, can you tell me a bit about how this bubbles up from beyond just a simple ROI calculation for, hey, I spent this much and I saved some risk to my company, to something that's a little bit more impactful to us as a country?
Yeah, happy to. Obviously, there are outcomes that occur after a major event. A lot of stuff is hitting the financials of corporations' bottom lines. When you look at corporate national security, what that means, to us, it's a new vertical that's essentially been forming underneath our feet over the past couple of years. As the geopolitical world heats up, frankly, the corporations are on the front line of defense. From a perspective down in the U.S., there's roughly 300,000 companies that are critical to U.S. national security. If we expand that out globally to America and all of our allies, we're looking at about 1 million organizations that, if they're offline for a period of time, significant amount of civilian livelihood is impacted. And so when it came time to figuring out how are we going to go ahead and go about solving this very, very complex and very important problem, it started with what Kelman had teed up. Essentially, look, if we got to do this at scale, 1 million organizations, that's a tremendously significant number. The only way that I could think to accomplish this goal was to leverage how I accomplished being successful in my career in business. Spoiler alert, I never had a class in business. I never took that in school. I studied physics and electrical engineering. And I found my way into cybersecurity and focused on the defense aspect of that, essentially routing my way from very, very low-level sales associate all the way up to major accounts at a major email vendor. And because of my methodology and complex problem solving and really just organizational approach of getting everything aligned in a way that people could understand, I was put in charge of helping split General Electric into 3 companies, which was a very, very cool effort. I would have killed to have what we're here showing you today methodology-wise. As far as stack ranking stuff. But the net of it was I mathed my way through that career. And then when I had the opportunity, and when I was talking to Kelman about this new methodology that we had discovered, it was so refreshing because for the first time in my career, not only was I able to leverage my collegiate background and getting into the data, I love getting into the data, but I was able to allow an outcome or enable an outcome, I'll say, where you had the business, the cybersecurity teams, the information technology teams, and everyone talking the same language. And there's no way, I feel, to make very quick cyber resilience happen without everyone being able to communicate and understand the impact and everyone being on the same sheet of music with why we're doing this project over this project. So to me, it was taking that mathematical-based approach or applied science approach to corporate defense. And starting at the very large, and then essentially that's where I had to tee up with Chris. It was a necessity. I understood the dynamic of how the very complex operated, but those very large organizations are nothing without the other businesses in their supply chain and the critical vendor pool. They need that for their own operability, and that's where Chris had a phenomenal. I spent 15 years in the enterprise space, and you spent about that in the SMB space, scaling out massive programs across thousands of organizations.
Yeah, I'll say just one more thing. Corporate national security, we're going to call it CNS. If you hear CNS, this is what we're talking about. It's about what makes you tick. So if you attended the FAIL panel, and I'm sure many of you did, one of the things that was mentioned was a sense of justice. Right, so my background is in criminology and criminal justice originally. It's what I wanted to do. So I've brought that spirit into cybersecurity. So I think we're like-minded in the room and that we all probably have an overinflated sense of justice. We think we're the good guys. We're fighting the bad guys, right? This is that mentality, but nationalized. And it's very unique. Maybe you've heard this, maybe you haven't. But the space we're in right now is incredible. Right? If a foreign adversary landed on the shores, what would the national response be? It's pretty obvious. It would be dramatic. But you're quite literally, sitting in your office, and you may have on the other end of an attack, somebody in a foreign military uniform. That's very unique, right? So this is kind of just sort of what makes us tick. And to put this in kind of relative terms for the layman, not that any of you are, is, this is my mother being able to go to the ER when something happens. The ambulance not showing up to the door and being turned away because they're under cyber attack, like has happened in many hospitals in the United States. It's being able to access my bank account. It's that real world impact that I think we often miss, getting stuck in sort of speeds and feeds, attacks, TTPs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So I'm going to stop you there for a second, because here's a challenge we're seeing. And I got a friend here I know could probably answer this question for me. I at least want your perspective. How do you measure risk, Julian?
I think there are many ways to measure risk. So just a quick introduction. I'm Julian Ducloy from Marsh, Canada, and so I run the cyber advisory practice there, and we're very tied to insurance markets, and the question of how do you define how much cyber insurance you need, and then you measure the financial impacts of risk. But there is not one answer to your question. And we do use either stochastic modeling with statistical approaches, or the one we like very much to use is like scenario development, where we define exactly what could happen to an organization, worst case, and then we quantify each consequence one by one. And we have done very good projects with Kelman here. Thank you.
Wasn't meaning to pump me up, but thank you. I picked on Julian very specifically because, as much as he said all that, anytime I've worked him, at the end of the day, when we had to go back in front of the customer, there was one thing we used to quantify and qualify their risk. And what was that?
Dollars.
It was money. Let's not kid ourselves, right? And I'm going to say it up front, right? If anyone has any other measurement they're using, please let me know. But when I have to go to my boss, right, he doesn't actually want to hear about the latest APT. He doesn't actually want to hear about the latest threat vectors I've discovered in the range. Yes, your question?
You see, thinking only in terms of money is sometimes unidimensional. And it is oversimplification. Yeah. So, I go back to the basics. There is likelihood and impact. So those are the two things which I would like to rate the risk on.
Again, you're 100% right, except here's fundamentally the challenge I'm coming back to. That impact, my boss's boss, is still going to measure in money. What did that cost him ultimately at the end of the day? Right? Yeah.
If you don't mind, just laying the landscape here too. You got to take a look at the ecosystem that's grown to what it is today. I remember when I was getting into cybersecurity almost 15 years ago, there was 100 vendors really that you had to keep an eye on. We've gotten to the point now where there's tens of thousands. I think there's well over 12,000 today. And the alignment of those sales forces onto the market is very much focused on the biggest of the big. I'd say in a lot of cases, the top 2,000 customers that are out there is what's being targeted. And just going back to that example, talking about guys globally at that scale, we got about 1 million organizations that, on our side of the feds, we want to make sure that essentially we got people that are taking a look at building that cyber resilience within those. And there's resource constraints. There's a lot of things on the personnel side that you can't get to. It's the budgetary stuff. But back to what we were talking about with money being sort of a universal language. You could have all the plans you could imagine on what the business should do and approve to get stuff built in a cyber resilient way. But getting those projects over the line and getting them over the line, frankly, quickly is such an important component of getting everything from a metrics perspective. Like we're measuring everything in dollars in this aspect with money. And that allows the business to now be talked to and understand, because all the other departments are talking to them in dollars and ROI. But taking cybersecurity and forming it into that type of mode allows the business to fully understand the impact. You're not asking for us to spend, let's say, $100,000 on this solution because it's going to block 99 point, XYZ amount of threats that are hitting our network. You're spending this $100K because it's going to remove maybe $1 million of my risk exposure out of the org. That's a different message than, well, I think we need to do this from a blocking percentage and all the speeds and feeds. And that was a trap that I fell into early in my career. Again, very scientific. I could memorize all the data points. I could memorize all the statistics. When my career really changed trajectory was when I started talking about like the outcomes we could hit, and then proving that with the math and frankly showing my work. You know, my degree that I got, I did not get any credit if I didn't show my work. So it's such an important component of this, especially for the leadership to look at this and say, hey, dude, I get why, you know, okay, we're going to remove $1 million or maybe more at this multiplier. Like, I can improve that all day long. But until it's sort of framed into that language, I know I personally have had a lot of challenges getting people to do the obvious thing, I'll say. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that type of just experience. But
so, sorry to cut you off, Zach, but I want to get actually to the thing I asked you to do when you came up here for us, and that was help me qualify for everybody here in Canada. What is some kind of look we could have on? Push the slide forward.
yeah.
See, cyber risk quantification. We want to quantify it based on money. So I kind of asked the question: what is the risk in Canada? Take my top 10 companies that we all depend on, right? We all know that large grocery store we go to and we expect our food there. We all know, you know, our big infrastructure. So I asked them to specifically focus on Canada. Can you tell me what is the cyber risk for Canada? What in my country? What am I looking at here?
Yeah, Kelvin, we ran
Big
the
boys,
numbers.
for the big boys.
It's over 25 billion right now. That's just the top 10 largest Canadian organizations that we ran this morning, just through the process, the methodology, and the calculator.
Okay, and while that sounds like a big scary number, here's reality. My government probably burns that much in a quarter because, well, they're a government. Is that really a risk? Like, I'm the guy in the street. What do I care if corporately, nationally, these big ass companies lose $25 billion? I'm sure their next quarter they'll make $25 billion. So I put that in a little bit more perspective for me.
Gotcha, Kelvin. So it's the stuff we're all thinking about right now. It's the darker stuff. It's the impact of human lives. It's the impact of people getting food, energy, water, et cetera. It's all connected. I think we remember when Rogers was, you know, offline for about a week and a half, if you will, a couple years ago. And the sheer amount of impact that caused all the organizations that relied on that for communication. It gets really tough. And essentially, I can't get to the grocery store. Maybe emergency services are online. Like, that type of stuff is what we're trying to prepare for when we talk about corporate national security. And yeah, it is a little bit of a bit of a dark subject because, you know, it is impacting lives. You know, there's the United Healthcare breach that happened. You had people that were standing from me to Chris, where I'm at the counter in my pharmacy and I need that medicine that Chris has behind the counter, and the systems aren't online. I can't get the medicine that I need right now. And even going back into the response of getting, you know, them back online, there were people that worked days. There were impacts to lives of the responders. They had people that were carted out of that event. They had all hands on deck for many, many incident response firms to go ahead and fix that particular event. And again, this is the stuff no one wants to ever go through. It's awful, it's terrible. I did about 36 or so incidents as incident commander over my professional career. And, you know, every single time you're going through, like, this is arguably the worst time in that particular technology stakeholders' like career, especially if it's their first time they've seen it. And again, I've seen the sleeping bags in the offices. I've seen the calls to the family, all that stuff. Being able to go out there and essentially getting them just the basic human needs, like, dude, you've been wearing this shirt for 3 days. Can I go to Target or can I go to Walmart or whatever? Get you a new shirt. Can I go pick up food? Like, all that type of stuff. Just all of that kind of folds into when people see incidents, they think like, oh, there's a lot of people on computers, a lot of people on monitors. We're like staging all this stuff, but it's hitting people at like the most human elements of it, because there's not an easy answer in a lot of these cases, especially when those attacks are persistent. And again, that's the type of stuff that I have experienced that I don't want people to have to experience. And we're kind of heading in that route, just in the technology space, where that stuff's going to happen. And it's how quickly can you like get back up and get back online and get back to continuity for all that stuff.
But what if I understand this is my big top 10.
Yeah.
I got tons of small businesses, particularly in Canada, so I'm really going to be okay. So fine, I'll just go to mom and pop shops, and I'm not going to worry about my big infrastructure. Aren't I technically still covered and don't have to worry about this?
That's your domain, Chris.
Yeah, we hear this a lot. Everybody thinks when you think critical infrastructure, you think big. You think the big companies, right? And the second assumption they make, not only are they big, but the government's got this, right? It's all good. You know, Canada's going to cover this, what have you. And maybe you'll be surprised to learn, maybe you won't, but that the vast majority, like north of 75% of the businesses that map to critical infrastructure in this country are small and privately owned. A lot of times they're not government regulated. There's no real oversight there or control. You know, it's businesses like ours that are really keeping this country afloat. And, you know, to your point, Kelman, maybe they can survive, right? Maybe they can't, but maybe they can. You know, in the United States, there's bailouts, there's all kinds of things. We had the big MGM breach in 19 and 23. They survived both of them with flying colors, but obviously they have the revenue to do that. Real quick, show of hands, SMB. Who in the room was considered an SMB in Canada? 1, 2, yeah, thank you. Thank you. So the majority of the room, which is about what I expected. So, you know, you guys are, as Zach mentioned, on the front line of defense. And that sounds corny, but it's true, right? Yeah, I don't think you realize the impact that you have on the grander scale here in the country of Canada. The interconnected nature of everything, the whole ecosystem, right? We saw with COVID some of the ripple effects of supply chain, and that wasn't a coordinated cyber attack. So what happens when there is a coordinated cyber attack? People are smart. They're starting to do their research. Things like ChatGPT obviously make this stuff incredibly easy. You know, we can ask ChatGPT, who are the most critical suppliers in Alberta, for example. It's going to give me the answer. It's going to give me my targets. And again, it's very difficult to put in perspective these choke points. So I'll give you a personal example. Where I'm from, or close to where I'm from, is a guy called the Coupling King. That's what he calls himself. So if you're not familiar, coupling is a pipe fitting, essentially, right? This guy makes custom pipe fittings that the entire water authority for the county uses. They source it from one guy. He's extremely blue collar. He runs a small family-owned, operated shop. It's entirely dependent on supply chain logistics and whatnot. If there's any interruption to his line of business, all of a sudden these very custom couplings don't hit that county anymore. And man, I've almost said it so many times. So, you know, what does that mean? Well, that means in a small shop, we're talking less than 30 employees, very low revenue, that this guy is a single choke point for the entire water authority for the county. This is a major county. You would recognize the name of the primary city in it, I guarantee it. So, you know, what's the point? Well, it's just everything I've already said. Again, think about your business. Think about the impact of your business, not just immediately, but what is the ripple effect if you go offline? What does it actually look like? You know, if you're a doctor, it's obvious. It's one-to-one, right? That's B2C. But if you're B2B and you go offline, are you a critical supplier to them? What does that actually look like in your day-to-day lives? And I hope that you'll start to understand that you're part of a much bigger picture here than perhaps you realize. So.
This sounds pretty doom and gloom. So basically, it sounds to me like we're done for. Eventually, they're just going to rip the, you know, in the event of a war, what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, let me first say that, you know, we didn't want to get up here and do a bunch of doom and gloom, but we do kind of have to set the stage. So, again, I reference the fail panel again. You know, Chris said the lights are still on. The water's still flowing, right? There is hope here. If we properly quantify that risk, if we really understand the risk in dollars and cents, then our business will perhaps survive that. And again, you've probably heard this message a few times while we're here, but we really want to send that home for you, because as you mentioned, it comes back to money, guys. At the end of the day, it might not sound that way, right? We all speak in text speeds and feeds, and it all makes sense to us, and we go to our CEO, our CISO, what have you. Maybe you're the CISO, you're going to the rest of the C-suite, the board, what have you, trying to justify what it is that you need. You've got this beautiful PowerPoint ready to go, justifying it from a technical perspective. But even if you're talking outcomes, 9 times out of 10, you're still talking technical outcomes, right? We sit boards. A lot of our friends sit boards. I will tell you, when you come in and you start talking, they glaze over. They don't hear anything. They don't understand that impact at all. Now, that sounds crazy, but I've had so many people come to me that I've worked with over the past, salespeople I've worked with, and they say, hey, what the heck? They can't justify $2 per user per month. I'm like, well, They've got $22 per users per month. You've already sold them, right? You're just adding on top of that. You have to make this make sense for them. You're not putting it in proper context, right? So whether you're external to a business as a consultant or internal, it doesn't really matter. The message should be the same. You need to quantify this risk. You need to put it in its proper context and deliver that message in an ROI sense. What is the cost of this solution versus the risk exposure that I currently experience? And if I implement this, what is that reduction in risk exposure?
Can I build on that, Chris? When you're looking at this too, and you're looking at the impact that you're going to be able to make at the organization, and it's really frustrating to me. I'm going to vent a little bit. I'm seeing all this stuff in the news. I have all these friends on LinkedIn, all these green banners around pictures of buddies that I know are phenomenal at what they do. They've hit every KPI. They've nailed it as far as what they needed to do for the business to keep it secure. And what's frustrating to me is the fact that the business is not recognizing that the insanely complex, sophisticated stuff that these groups of individuals that are organized into a teaming structure to tackle insanely tough stuff to tackle, the business is not understanding the impact to the organization. And so when you're looking at the ability to make an impact and start counting up the amount of risk you're remediating, that 25 billion number that we have there, that's essentially the number from this morning. The number that would have been 5 years ago or 10 years ago, much smaller. I remember when I got into the, won't do that again. I remember when I got into the industry and you had essentially your PCI data trading at it was about $1, less than $1. And you had your HIPAA data, the PII data trading around $10. And now we're up to a point where PCI data is, that's trading up near $10. And the HIPAA data, or the data that is your personal information, where people can use to steal your identity, that's trading at around $187 on the dark web. Now, add on top that you have essentially ransomware that, back in, I was doing a lot of ransomware incident response, one of the incidents we had, they had FBI, they had Interpol involved. It was the biggest ransomware they had ever seen, or at least that's what they were telling me, and it was only like $300,000. United Health Group got popped twice for 24 mil. It's massively increasing. That number would have looked a lot different if we ran this report even a year ago. So what we're trying to do is really, again, sort of highlight what we feel is something that folks might not have visibility. How do you fix what you don't know exists? And really the dollar impact stuff that we're talking about here today, and why shifting it to dollars is such an important thing, is because when you're focusing left of boom, and you're getting to the point where maybe we're not going to have, if we're looking at how this is all being calculated, the frequency, the severity, and how painful is this going to be in the event of a black swan type event, a major cyber event. The goal is to, temper that down as much as possible. And even if it's a temporary scaling up of your cyber insurance as you're building those proactive defenses, at least in that period of time, if there is that black swan type of event, that you're not going to be in a situation where the organization is being impacted to the level that they were not prepared to be impacted at. Coming back to you.
I'm going to take this down a notch, because in reality, this is good. I like to know that my country is protected. I like to know that I have a street to drive down to get to my job. But let's bring it back a bit. This is kind of cool. I got lots of risk quantification, but how do I quantify things that get closer to me? And I'll give you an example. I'm starting to see scenarios where the security budget or your IT budget is showing up now, but now it's coming with a section of already allocated for me based on AI, which I think, well, that's kind of cool. Now, by the boss's perception or the business's perception, the fact that they've allocated that means I now have technically more resources because they don't necessarily understand the technology. But in their mind, they don't have to increase my budget. They just have to allocate it towards AI, and theoretically, they've given me more. How do I communicate that back to the business as the technical person going, I think this new technology might be a risk? Is there a way that, the people working in the ground, starting to play with a new technology, starting to realize that maybe it's not everything it's made out to be, or maybe we need some more work or money to figure it out? How do I communicate that back to my business in a way that helps us become more secure, helps us become better, and doesn't get me fired?
That's a great one, Kelman. So with cyber and with AI program risk and NIST releasing, the keynote was phenomenal. It was crazy to see just the amount of identities you got to take care of when it gets to the agentic AI approach. But it's two areas of quantification. It's your cyber risk into dollars, and then it's your AI program risk into dollars. And in a lot of cases, there's all these AI programs that are launching very fast, very aggressively. We got to do this or else we're going to get hosed. We got to do this because our competition is doing this. It's just what we have to do, guys. It's what we got to do. And that very, very aggressive push, there's a lot of the basics. And I think everyone in this room has gone and thought about this a ton about, well, what are we really, okay, we're doing that. Okay, how do I tackle this? Again, like especially with new AI programs and the various things that could impact your AI program that will negatively impact all the stuff the CEO is telling the board and the shareholders of what's going to happen and the outcomes. We're going to get a 4% boost on top line revenue. That's awesome. We, like Chris was saying, have the opportunity to sit a couple board meetings. There's one in particular that stood out since we were sitting at about this time 6 months ago roughly, and it was the CEO talking about the top line revenue boost, and then us highlighting from a risk perspective. Well, look, you're sitting on this amount of risk in dollars. If that 4% that you're boasting about and talking about, if that degrades down to 3% or 2%, do you guys have a way to revert back? And we asked the CEO that. CEO turns to the CIO, and they start going through the, well, what if this happens and, yeah, it is degrading. What if it goes negative? It's negatively impacting our business. And it was one of those situations where the CIO, I don't know if he just wasn't really drilled into what was happening in the moment, and maybe he misheard the question, but he went down the whole path of like, oh, we totally test our systems, defense in depth. We use AI to target our systems. And the CEO is like, no, dude, I'm asking you, if our AI program degrades and we need to go back to the old way of doing this, can we do that? And of course, the answer was no. We got rid of all those people. And those are probably people with tribal intimate knowledge of the organization. When I was covering that very large company I referenced earlier, it was very frustrating to me. Again, why I feel like I got to rant about this. You have people that had been there for 15 years, their father had been there, or mother had been there for 30 plus years, retired there. You have people that thought they were going to basically be at this organization their entire career. And they put their passion, they put their effort, they did everything that they should do. And still, it comes down to the, well, we gotta do this, and we gotta downsize. You gotta make the balance of books, make it right. Again, another hook into if you knew the impact that maybe those individuals are providing to the organization in dollars, maybe these outcomes happen a lot different. But
I'll add one quick thing.
Please do.
When you're trying to justify any technical project, right, where the whole fundamental thing here is that they don't understand, right, and take that to the next level with AI. Right? They see the operational efficiency increase from AI, but they don't even understand what AI is, right? Agentic AI. We use these stupid buzzwords all the time, and our CEOs and all these people get all excited about it, and that's fantastic, but it's your responsibility, right? I'm kind of putting this on you to properly inform your leadership of the risks of that AI. They've got the models around the efficiency increase, the revenue increase, et cetera, but you need to be able to show them if you do this, that's fantastic, but let me offset that. Let me net this, right? That's your gross efficiency increase, but let me net that back down with risk exposure that you now have, which in almost every case we've seen is exponential. It's massive. Oftentimes it outweighs the operational efficiency increases. Now this changes, the math changes depending on size of organization, a whole bunch of factors, but the point is that's beside the point. Maybe we can't stop it, and we probably don't want to, because AI makes your life a lot easier as well, but we need to put this in its proper context. We need to properly understand it, and it's our responsibility to communicate that risk to the leadership. You need to be in the driver's seat. There's nobody else in the organization who's doing it. It's got to be you.
Simply put, if you've got essentially everything mapped to dollars, stack ranking, what are the top 10 initiatives that remediate the most risk at the best ROI? It becomes a really fun and easy game to play with the people that are basically holding the purse to approve these initiatives, these projects, when you frame it in their methodology for how they make decisions. And we're all still building cyber resilience at the end of the day by attaching to that methodology. Kelvin, you think I should go into a little bit of the crazy math side of this? Or?
I was about to ask you. I mean, how do we know you didn't just ask ChatGPT, what's a good number to say for Canadian risk? Well, how much does this data go into it? How do you even know any of this is real? And how hard is this for anyone to do?
Yeah, it's difficult. For For us, it's a lot easier just because we have a bunch of data that's pumping into something that's pretty cool. But the net of it is this is a really, really messy slide chart, but this is something that we've correlated down or refined, I'll say, to the particular impact areas. So, when we're breaking out that 25 billion, we're highlighting, where's your risk sitting across these 8 specific areas, 7 if you want to count other being its own category that might have multiple categories in it. But this is kind of very similar to what we see across the board when we're running this analysis, whether it's publicly traded companies or it's SMB. This is your PII breach, your ransomware stuff, usually your top 2 heaviest hitters, but you'd be surprised. I mean, if you're heavy and you're rich on creating and innovating and building new things, IP compromise is going to be up there. If you're a target that hacktivists get energy around messing with you, like you're gonna be experiencing some of those issues. So the protecting against what's actually hitting your org and where your most risk is really kind of the methodology that we're trying to highlight here, because that's what the business is going to latch onto immediately, because they have to make sure that they're at a particular tolerance level.
And there's something interesting. We had this discussion offline, but I want to bring it into this conversation. So while we're talking about the various impacts from this, is there a specific technology or approach that can give the most bang for your buck, so to speak, if I'm going to use the language of the business? Say I've got a limited budget for security. Where do I get the most protection? Is there something that's easy to grasp onto, or is it just going to be unique for everyone and a free-for-all and good luck?
The interesting part about this, and I'll hand it over to Chris for this particular topic, is it's actually very similar for the largest of the large and the smallest of the small. Chris, you want to highlight a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So when you're quantifying risk, there's so many different ways to do this. There's so many different methodologies. We're not here to talk about ours. We're here to talk about the concept in general. But you see these financial impact by threat category. This doesn't necessarily speak to the techniques that led us here, right? So that obviously is something that needs to come into play. But if you want to put me on the spot and ask me if there's one thing, I'll say 2 things. One, and this was so funny that this was acknowledged yesterday in a similar session, but the greatest source of information that we use to determine whether anybody should use to determine kind of what that risk looks like is, again, as corny as it sounds, but it's chatter on the dark web. It's what does this look like? Who's talking about you? Why are they talking about you? Somebody yesterday literally took this line straight out of my mouth, so I'm not going to use the same analogy they did, but if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, probably is one. So there's some interesting stuff there. But identity security is top of the list often. We see that time and time and time again. That's a broad category. It's difficult to put into individual buckets. The CRQ methodology, whoever you go with, should be able to flesh that out for you, map it against a compliance framework of your choosing, so on and so forth. But when you're looking at, do you want to click? Yep. When you're looking at CRQ, cyber risk quantification, when you're looking at somebody to help you with CRQ, and let me back up just 1 minute. Zach mentioned this stuff is hard. This is complicated. There's actuaries behind this. There's universities behind this, oftentimes with a number of the companies that do this sort of thing to sort of validate what they're doing. And so my point here is that this isn't something that we expect a CISO, a director of IT, manager of security engineers, what have you, to be able to take under their belt. You need to communicate these results, but you need help. Whether that's an internal team, an external team, whatever that looks like, find somebody who understands this stuff that can help you. I promise you it will make your life a whole heck of a lot easier. So what we did is took just kind of we've been at this for a few years now, but this methodology goes all the way back to 2016. And over the course of that time, we've learned a lot of lessons about who's in this space, kind of separating the wheat from the chaff. So we put together a checklist. If you scan that QR code, you'll get the actual PDF of that checklist. But it's super useful to understand, again, whether it's internal or external, these are the things that you should be asking to validate this framework, this methodology, this approach. So a couple of them off the top, proven methodology, right? Obvious. But how is it proven? Is it financially backed? Is it peer reviewed? Where does the actual methodology come from? And there's a lot of geeky techy stuff I won't get into in this space, but this is extremely important. That business language output, that's dollars, right? We care about the tech. We care about how you're doing on control groups and subcontrol groups of NIST 153 and all of that. And of course, any CRQ provider is going to map that against your framework. But the real key here is each one of those controls, wherever you sit on that, needs to have a dollar amount assigned to it. You need to understand specifically on that individual subcontrol level what that looks like from a financial perspective. We won't go through all of these, but that decision support, this is the justification of whatever it is you need to do. And typically our first question is, what is it that you think you need to do? How are you communicating the efficacy of your cybersecurity program? And then pushing back on them when they say, hey, we need to do X, Y, Z. I'm like, well, how do you know that? Why is that the most important thing to you? Are you prioritizing MDM or MAM over privileged access management? Maybe the MDM makes your life a whole heck of a lot easier because you're able to manage multiple devices, whereas you have a massive gap in privileged access management and the keys to the kingdom are widely exposed. So we see all kinds of different thought processes around how people make decisions, and a lot of times it's based on multiple things. It's just purely historical, right? A typical insurance company approach to this, how many accidents have been on this interstate determines the probability of the next accident happening. That's great, but cyber doesn't work that way. So a couple other things here, independence and trustworthiness. You touched on this one off the top, Kelman, but be careful if the risk quantification is coming from the vendor you've already bought 8 different solutions from. I wouldn't call that independent, right? Especially if the source data is primarily coming from their tool set. Obviously, there's a conflict of interest there. Not saying there has to be a conflict of interest, but if something does hit the fan, inevitably you're sitting in a court of law, whatever that looks like, then you need to be able to tell them specifically why you chose the vendor you chose. Why did you trust them? Did you understand what the business impact was going to be from choosing X, Y, Z? A lot of times, and put yourself in that hot seat, would you be able to answer that question? I would wager for many of you in the room, the answer is no. You couldn't properly justify why you made that decision outside of technical terms that a judge, a jury will understand.
Well, I think actually if I could summarize a second, because I've come from the vendor space, the vendor and you tend to position based on the technology. I like this product X because it does it better, this product Y because it does better. And we spend like 80% of the security project, for example, talking about vendors and maybe 20% on the actual architecture and design, which I think is ass backwards, to be blunt. But I think the real message here is, yes, the vendor you choose is important, but in the sense of how is that affecting your supply chain? Mm-hmm. You've created a business dependency that interlinks within your organization, within your country. How is that being quantified? Not, do they have the best speeds and feeds? That's not the right answer. It's, how are you supporting my business? How do I support your business? Are you going to be here in 2 weeks? What if you get exploited? How am I impacted? So the vendor choice is a factor, but more from how supply chain and how they're now part of your business and dependency rather than speeds and feeds and features.
Be data defined is so important with all of this. When you're talking to people about quantifying risk, especially quantifying risk in dollars, having them tell you a baseline of the actual exposure you're facing today is something that they should do. It's behind the whole corporate national security mission here to ensure that people at least have a baseline of where they're going, and then we work off that. And that should be part of the validation process. I'm
going to have to cut you off a bit because we are going to run out of time here. Yeah. Turn into more conversation in the slides. So before we get completely thrown out, we have limited. Is there any questions from the audience? I apologize. I should have been more aggressive with you guys. Tell me, is there anything in your head? Anything clicking? Anything interesting?
Pierre Kelman.
Call us out.
Got one.
We got.
Sorry, gentleman there. By the way, you can always run up to the mic and override me.
Awesome. Thank you. So a question that I have for you when you're talking about quantifying risk. If you have a security department and you're looking to increase headcount, what is the simple and most effective way that you've come across to quantify to get an additional headcount when the interesting thing is you're looking to either clean up technical debt or do something that may be hard to justify to the business?
I love that question. I'll give you a very quick response, and if it's time, basically when you have a situation where you could show that your organization aligning with your peers is investing this much and hitting this level of success, that is what moves businesses at the very top to move quickly, to increase headcount, to increase cybersecurity budgets, to increase the cyber insurance coverage so we're not all freaking out when we have something to lock up all our systems, et cetera. But leveraging that in that methodology to go ahead and show like where you particularly might be at your organization not making the quote unquote investments that you should be. And the best way to get that over the line with executive leadership is to show them that, hey, our competition or our peer is doing a way better job than us. How do we have a little bit more pride in what we're doing? How do we get, sort of right size what we should be investing on this? Did that answer your question?
It's tough. I mean, putting it in proper context, right, is a real answer. There's a long answer I want to give you. We don't have the time for it,
Yeah.
but we're happy to talk after, or
Go with another
get
one.
us on the
I
end.
think we got time to sneak one more in.
More.
Excuse me, ma'am. Rumor has it you had a question. I didn't want to miss you.
Thank you. I was wondering what goes into the cost for the PII breach, because that was, I think, the top on your table, and then what is other?
So simple. What's the price of what is the price of postage in your country you live, and notifications versus records? We have some people that don't even have enough cyber insurance to cover just a snail mail letter to notify all the people they have records for that there's been a breach. So like that, again, basic arithmetic, but going into that, there's financial penalties, there's a lot of stuff that roll into this, and there's a lot of, if the risk quantification calculators you're talking to are doing the right stuff, they're taking in a lot of that data to ensure that, they have very good answers for that. But that's a simple one. Just the price of a notification, depending on the number of records for those top 10 Canadian ones, I mean, that might be many, many millions of dollars just to send one letter out. And they might not be aligned with that type of coverage.
And so with that, guys, I'm going to have to cut you off. We are actually still around. Although I'm losing a bit of my voice, I'm happy to have more conversations. Although you probably guessed the real braids behind the tools are standing up on the stage. Did I just call you a tool? I'm sorry. Please hang out, ask some questions. We do appreciate you coming. Actually, the fact that people showed up lets us know that there is some interest in us in a national perspective. I, for one, see security as much bigger than just my company now. It's something that I got to think about for my whole country. But thank you very much, and thank you, everybody, for your time. Please enjoy SecTor.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.